Over the years, there have been chemicals that have fueled wars and nearly destroyed societies, plants that have shaped cultures, power-hungry rulers who just couldn't stop, and strange love addictions that got so out of hand that empires nearly collapsed. These are some of the most addictive things throughout history. Nicotine. Tobacco has a long history of use in the Americas. It's thought that Native Americans have been smoking the stuff in spiritual context for 8,000 years. But when Europeans got their hands on it, it took off around the globe. I mean, it was an immediate hit. Tobacco was used as currency, and it was thought to cure diseases. Unfortunately, for millions of people who've died from it over the years, it actually causes diseases. And it's addictive as heck. The domestication and cultivation of tobacco started in modern-day Mexico and parts of Central and South America around 6000 BC. Archaeological evidence suggests that tobacco was one of the earliest cultivated crops in the Americas. They started farming this stuff right around the same time they started cultivating maize, give or take 1,000 years. Tobacco plants that belonged to the genus Nicotiana were originally wild. I mean, they weren't cooking the stuff up in labs back then. And certain species were selectively bred and cultivated for specific purposes. It eventually made its way up into the modern-day U.S. One tribe in particular, the Cherokee, have an especially fascinating story about tobacco's origins. In Cherokee belief, the Little People, who they referred to as Nunyehi or Yunwi-Junsi, are a race of, let's call them diminutive beings, who inhabit the mountains and forests of the Cherokee homeland, mostly in parts of present-day Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama. The Little People are often depicted as benevolent but elusive spirits who help or protect people in different ways. They're considered guardians of the natural world and are associated with sacred places like caves and certain plants like tobacco. According to Cherokee folklore, the Little People introduced tobacco to Cherokee people. The story goes that a Cherokee man encountered the Little People while wandering deep in the mountains near modern-day Asheville, North Carolina. The Little People welcomed him into their community, and they shared their knowledge of tobacco cultivation and use. They taught the Cherokee man how to grow and prepare tobacco and what rituals to perform with the plant. After the Europeans came to the New World, tobacco took off. Tobacco and the addictive nicotine it contains stopped being used in the spiritual context in which the Native Americans used it and became an economic commodity. In Virginia, the plant was even used as currency. You could even buy people with tobacco. It was that valuable, or people were that invaluable. When it traveled across the pond to Europe, people even thought it could cure diseases, though unfortunately its only proven medicinal property is giving you lung disease. Nazi speed. World War II wasn't just the most destructive war in human history, it was also maybe the most pill-headed war in history. Throughout the war, the Nazis were fueled by two things: hatred towards anyone non-Aryan and methamphetamine. The Nazi doctrine, as outlined by the mustache man and his cronies at the top, professed a disdain for most substances. Using things in social context was considered weak. No, true, strong Aryans would stoop to dulling their mind with them. But then along came Pervitin. A German chemist had seen how effective an American amphetamine called Benzedrine was when it was used as a performance enhancer for athletes in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. He quickly added a methyl group to the amphetamine compound, an additional carbon atom attached to the extra hydrogen atoms. Boom! An extra potent way to take your Aryan energy to the next level. Pervitin was marketed by the Nazis as just that. Pervitin hit the shelves in Germany in the winter of 1937, and thanks to an aggressive marketing campaign, it was a hit. You could get it at a pharmacy without a prescription. Pervitin quickly made its way into the German military. It was a crucial element to their blitzkrieg strategy. Lightning War, as it's translated, was a whole lot quicker and more effective if you had soldiers who could stay up for 3 to 4 days at a time. Even when the addictive nature of the pills became apparent in 1940, the Timmerwerke, the pharmaceutical company that was producing the stuff, was pumping out over 800,000 tablets each day. Between April and June of 1940 alone, German soldiers were given over 35 million Pervitin pills. They were given to pilots in chocolate bars dubbed Flieger's Schokolade, or Flyer's Chocolate, and tank crews were giving Panzer Schokolade, or Tanker's Chocolate. Yummy. Bayer's Miracle Cure. What started out as an effective cough suppressant that was helpful for treating people with severe respiratory illnesses soon turned out to be one of the most addictive substances in history. Imagine a doctor handing you a nicely packaged bottle to help with your cough back in the late 1800s. It's labeled Heroisch. Heroisch? You say in German, like a female hero, eh? Yes, says the doctor. We've just discovered this stuff and it works wonders. Unfortunately, when the substance runs out, you start shivering and throwing up and going through withdrawals. Oops. Uh-oh. The poppy derivative we're talking about was first synthesized in 1874 by a British chemist named C.R. Alder Wright while he was working in St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. But it wasn't until 1897 that the stuff was resynthesized and developed into a marketable product by Felix Hoffmann, a chemist working for the German pharmaceutical company Bayer. The compound was patented by Bayer, and they marketed it under the brand name that comes from the German word Heroisch, meaning heroic or strong. They apparently wanted to emphasize its potency and effectiveness. Turns out it was a bit too potent and a bit too effective. At first, Bayer's new medicine was praised as a medical breakthrough that was more effective than other medication because it was less addictive. It hit the shelves and people could buy it without a prescription. You could find it right alongside your everyday cough syrups and powders. The only problem, it turned out to be a whole lot more addictive than anything you could imagine. But the history of one of the world's most addictive substances goes way farther back than the 1800s. Poppy seeds have been harvested for more than 5,000 years. The Sumerians call the poppy hulgil, or the joy plant. The Assyrians harvested it, so did the Babylonians, and so did the Egyptians, particularly under the reign of Thutmose IV. In the mid-300s BC, Alexander the Great got hold of the stuff and spread it to India and China. 1,500 years later, the British will control most of the world's trade of poppy derivatives and basically help huge swaths of the Chinese population become addicted to the stuff, which helped kick off the Opium Wars, which lasted from 1839 to 1860. And then along came Bayer, and the rest is history. Beetle Nut. If you find yourself in Papua New Guinea or some other island in Southeast Asia and you tell one of the locals a joke, you might be flashed a smile that looks like the person's been in a cage fight. Their teeth and gums are stained red, but not with blood, with a substance called beetle nut. An estimated 600 million people around the world, mostly in island Southeast Asia, chew beetle nut. It's the fourth most popular psychoactive substance in the world behind alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine. It has a long history of use. It pops up in the archaeological record around 4,600 years ago in the Philippines. The substance comes from the seed of the Areca catechu palm tree, which has psychoactive alkaloids, mainly something called alkaline, an upper that gives you a surge of energy and a sense of euphoria. To take the stuff, Pacific Islanders grind it up and wrap it in betel leaves, which are covered with slake lime, a substance that helps heighten the effects of the nut. Alkaline can be highly addictive. It's also proven to cause certain mouth and throat cancers. But still, like any popular substance, the physical effects of the stuff often outweigh the risk associated with it. Beetle nut is a tradition among many island cultures who have been chewing on it for millennia and staining their teeth a deep reddish purple in the process. A red smile is even considered a sign of beauty in a lot of these places. One of the stranger things associated with beetle nut occurs in Taiwan, where there are workers known as beetle nut beauties. These young women who work in roadside stalls, usually these glass-encased, neon-lit windows that makes it seem like the ladies are selling something else entirely, if you catch my drift. They often wear revealing clothing and use their lack of clothing as an incentive for passers-by, usually men, to come check out the goods. The phenomenon is fairly recent and is only found in Taiwan. It started in the 1960s and it really took off in the 90s. Now there are more than 100,000 stalls dotted across the island. The Cat Wars. Cat is a cocoa leaf plant that acts as a stimulant and contains a natural amphetamine called cathinone. It's been harvested and chewed in social contexts around the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula for centuries, mostly in modern-day Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen. But it's also been declared illegal in many countries and has helped fund some of the region's most destructive wars. Like a lot of psychoactive substances, cat is not without its controversy. They chew it on a regular in Somalia, where it's legal. In Yemen, where it's also legal, its cultivation takes up a whopping 40% of the country's total water supply. In a country that's been devastated by civil war in recent years and millions of people are without safe drinking water, that statistic has certainly raised a few eyebrows. Cat was also a key resource in the Somali Civil War, a war that's been ongoing for more than 30 years. In Somalia, people gather in places called mafresh, kind of like a Somali version of a British pub, where people socialize and chew cat. But during the U.S. involvement in the Somali Civil War in 1993, particularly the Battle of Mogadishu, a battle that was popularized by the book and subsequent movie Black Hawk Down. American soldiers and commanders were astounded by the fact that Somali fighters just kept going and going. A lot of it was chalked up to cat. As a result, the substance was banned in the United States. It was banned in the UK shortly after. The decisions were controversial. Were Westerners stigmatizing a cultural practice or legitimately worried about the plant's addictive properties? What's more certain is the fact that cat has for sure funded a lot of war efforts in Somalia over the years. It's nearly $1 billion a year industry. Misplaced love. It's often not just substances that can be addictive, but emotions. Love is one of them, and it's certainly a beautiful thing. A world without love would be a dark place for sure. But some people can take anything too far. Love addiction has been observed and studied by psychoanalysts. Freud mentions it. A psychoanalyst named Sandor Rado called a love addict a person whose needs for more love, more succor, more support grow as rapidly as the frustrated people around her try to fill up what is, in effect, a terrible and unsatisfiable inner emptiness. One of history's most bizarre kings may well have been suffering from love addiction. At least he was suffering from having feelings he didn't know what to do with at a time where he couldn't even express them if he wanted to. King Ludwig II of Bavaria is often referred to as the Mad King. He was a monarch who went crazy for castles, fairy tale castles he spent his inheritance on. He was born in 1845. After calling off a wedding with a potential queen, he basically fell in love with the composer Wagner. Not knowing what to do with his feelings, he started building castles. He built the Neuschwanstein Castle, perched on a hilltop in the Bavarian Alps. He was going for fairy tale vibes. Medieval nostalgia and operas written by Wagner were always swirling around in his head. He needed more. He built palaces like Linderhof Palace and Herrenchiemsee Palace. Each was so extravagant, so opulent that you can't help but think what this mad king was compensating for. He struck up a close friendship with Wagner. Were they more than friends? Historians aren't exactly sure, but they do say that Wagner had the tendency to owe people money and might have seen King Ludwig as the perfect dupe, a lovesick king living in a perpetual fairy tale who would throw money at the composer whenever he needed it. Ludwig's grandiose construction projects eventually came back to bite him, though. The financial strain of Ludwig's fairy tale love addiction eventually led to political and public scrutiny. His subjects questioned why all this money was going towards castles when it could be going towards more pragmatic things. In 1886, Ludwig was declared mentally ill and unfit to rule. He was removed from power and placed under house arrest at Berg Palace. Just a few days later, he and his psychiatrist were found deceased in a lake on the estate. The case was never officially solved. No one knows who ended his life. Thanks for watching. What other addictive things do you want to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Nutty History.